All right, well, hello, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm TOSCA Lee, and I am one of the Rogue Women Writers. We are a group of 10 thriller writers whose backgrounds range from intelligence officer to journalism, to crime scene analyst, to special investigators, hostage negotiators, psychotherapists, to international consultants, a former pageant queen, to White House strategists. A quick orientation. There's a chat room on the side of the screen. So if you click the chat icon, you can leave comments. So please, participants and special guests, please feel free to go ahead and introduce yourself with a quick comment in the chat bar. And be sure to put your questions in there and we'll try to get to those at the end. For those of you joining us on Facebook Live, please be sure to say hello and leave a comment if you have anything you'd like to tell the authors, and especially if you have a question you'd like to ask, and we'll do our best to try to accommodate them all. So we are in for a treat, as the authors tonight will be reading from their newest work. Yay, we love this. Sharing a few of their favorite treats and maybe even a few behind the scenes secrets. All the books discussed here tonight are available through your local bookstore, so please be sure to grab or order a copy and support your local booksellers, and also check out our guests' previous work as well. We have a quadruple giveaway tonight. We will be giving away a copy of Night Flight to Paris by CARA BLACK, Countdown by Brendan DuBois and James Patterson, All That Is Mine I Carry With Me by William Landay, and The Syndicate Spy by Brittany Butler. Winners are chosen from our registered attendees, and they'll be notified a few days after our event via email, so keep your eyes on your inboxes. Now, as I said, my name is TOSCA Lee, and I'm an author of 12 novels, most recently The Long March Home coming out in May, and I'm coming to you today from the Nebraska countryside, where it's cold. And I'm thrilled to be emceeing this event. So in no particular order, I'm going to introduce our four authors, and then I'm going to come back for their reading and discussion of their latest books. And then if we have time, some round robin questions. So if you have any questions, don't forget to type those in the chat. Okay, let's get to it. CARA BLACK has served coffee in Switzerland, studied Buddhism in India, and poured drinks in Bangkok. She is the multiple award and honor-winning author of the Amy Ludak series, although her original schooling was in Chinese history. Studying this and teaching English in Tokyo, she met her husband and eventually settled in California as a Head Start program agent in Chinatown. But she encountered French literature through the French-speaking nuns, which began a love affair with the city featured in her new book. Hello, Cara.
Hello, Tosca. Nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much for joining us, and I have questions for you. But first, I'm going to go on to Brendan. Brendan DuBois is another multiple award-winning author who doesn't just write mysteries or crime fiction, but science fiction, political thrillers, and alternative history. A lifelong resident of New Hampshire, he also likes to win game shows like Jeopardy and The Chase. Hello, Brendan.
Hello, Tara. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. And James Patterson is with us too, a surprise guest. Who knew?
One and only.
And he's loving it. All right. I've got questions for you too, Brendan. But first, let me introduce former District Attorney William Landay, who has only published 4 books, but when those books are Mission Flats, The Strangler, Defending Jacob, and now All That Is Mine I Carry With Me, that's enough. He lives in Boston with his wife and 2 sons, and when he's not writing, he spends time with sports, music, movies, and mixing cocktails. So hello, William.
Hello. Happy to be here.
And you got your cocktail with you tonight.
Yeah, it doesn't really count as a cocktail. It's just straight bourbon.
Straight bourbon, okay. I think that's close enough.
Not even an ice cube.
Not even an ice cube. Neat. Okay. Brittany Butler. 9/11 prompted Brittany Butler to go to work in the intelligence community, moving right from college to counterterrorism operations in the Middle East. She left it behind, but not really, after 10 years when she became a mother and eventually found a place with a human rights organization alongside brave Arab women who risk everything to work for peace, inclusion, and modernization. All right, so hello, Brittany.
Hi.
Hello, thanks for being with us tonight. And I have questions for you too.
Great.
So let's start down the line here. Cara,
Yes.
you say
Well,
that Kate Rees discovered Turkish coffee in Cairo, which helps fuel her through this mission. And it's her go-to when a deadline, it's your go-to when a deadline approaches. Can you tell us what exactly is Turkish coffee?
Can you see this? Okay, it's what they, can you see it?
Yep.
So you pour in Turkey, I mean, in the Middle East, you put in the coffee grinds about yay so much, a little water, and you heat it up. So when, you know, it bubbles up and you drink it, I mean, there's a silt and mud at the bottom, and it seriously can put hairs on your chest. So that's what I found, and it will keep you going. So my protagonist, Kate Rees, stumbles upon it in Cairo, and you know, she says, this stuff is lethal. They don't have anything like this in Oregon, where I come from. So I just thought that was interesting to put in.
Oh, very interesting. Do you drink like the sludge part too then?
Yeah, you kind of do, you know. I pour it in this little cup, and then I you know, it's hard not to drink it, you know. It's hard to, you know.
Off the top.
Yeah, and then your teeth are all, anyway, never mind. But you know, if you have a deadline, Tosca, it's really good. You can meet
That's
your
okay.
deadline.
I may have to invest, but for now I don't have Turkish coffee, only regular coffee in my poison pen mug. So
Yay.
This is all I've got for now. Oh, yay. I've attempted to have everybody's drink tonight, and the word is attempt, but all right, Cara, will you tell us a little bit about Night Flight to Paris? What is the book about?
Well, yeah, it's set in 1942. It's a World War II suspense thriller, and I feel very honored to be with other thriller writers, since I usually write mysteries, and I love thrillers. So mine is, it's about a woman who is a sniper. She's a markswoman. She grew up in rural Oregon, learned, you know, hold a gun and shoot when she could, you know, 5 years old, 6 years old in the countryside during the Depression. So she has this skill, and she ends up in France. She marries a Welshman. They're stationed in the Orkney Islands as the war begins, I'm sorry, and they have a baby, and then the Luftwaffe attacks, and her husband and her baby daughter are killed. So Kate is filled with revenge. She wants to get back at the Germans. She doesn't think, you know, this was her war before, because we weren't in the war until 1941, but this is her war now. And she can't get back over the Atlantic because of the U-boat. So she is recruited by the British Secret Service. And now in 1942, she is sent back to Paris. Well, she doesn't know where she's being sent. And she will encounter sheikhs and spies and poets and partisans. And she can trust no one.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I can't wait to hear a little bit. Will you read to us, Cara?
I will. Thank you, Tosca. And I'm just going to go right into it. So it is somewhere in the English countryside, October of 1942. The car pulled up on the pebbled roadside at the crossroads, where a dairy truck was parked. A soldier opened the door for Kate Rees. She'd been made up to look like a middle-aged woman, fitted with false teeth to fill out her cheeks, and a dark shoulder-length hairpiece. Her chest had been bound in a padded vest under a Red Cross uniform. The soldier escorted her across the dirt road and into the cramped, windowless rear of the requisitioned truck. It smelt of sour milk. The Royal Army Forces driver in a freshly pressed uniform advised Kate to sit back and hold on. Little else she could do, squashed into a ledge by the milk bottle rack. Wasn't she supposed to be going on a mission? Where are you taking me? Confidential, I'm afraid, miss. Mrs., I'm Mrs. Rees. No names, please. No conversation. Sorry, Mrs., but that's orders. After a while, she must have closed her eyes and slept, the truck ground to a halt. Peering ahead through the mud-splashed windshield, She could make out high stone walls, damp with splotches of moss and topped by twisted iron spikes. Her heart dropped. Prison. A medieval prison stuck on what looked like the moors. Was this her destination? Her heart raced as the back doors opened. The driver took her things and assisted her as she stumbled out the back. Dawn broke in a warm glow. An Argus single-engine monoplane's wings glinted in the early morning on the rutted tarmac. The humming engine spit into a high rev. Someone shouted, "Hurry up!" She was sick of all this back and forth. Were they disorienting her on purpose, or just plain scrounging for available transport? Were the Brits this desperate? Were they actually losing the war? A hand gestured from an open metal door. Incredulous, Kate realized the rutted road was the takeoff strip. They'd been waiting for her. "Go," the driver shouted. Then she was running, tossing her bag inside just as reaching arms pulled her into the plane. She landed face down on a gunny sack of Royal Mail. She managed to right herself, spit out the grit on her tongue, and strapped on a harness. The tiny four-seater smelled of burned oil and damp wool as it bumped over the ruts in the road. The pilot pulled back the throttle, increasing the speed and sending her jostling on the mail. "Open your mouth so your ears pop," the pilot shouted. "We're about to trot." She didn't hear the rest. The road vanished. Out the cockpit window, she saw only gorse, pale purple heather, and rocks. The jagged rocks were coming toward them. Her stomach jumped. They were going down. Her scream was drowned in a bone-rattling shudder. The engine would catch fire and explode. She was going to die. The plane whined, complaining in the throes of a metallic shaking. The pilot cursed and wrestled with the throttle. Somehow, the bucking plane stabilized, heaving a last judder as if coming to after a spasm. The plane climbed, barely skimming the rocky crags, and headed toward the clouds. Her stomach plopped back where it belonged. She hoped she wouldn't be sick. The other two passengers were a man in an RAF uniform and a blindfolded figure wearing a flight suit, handcuffed to the seat. The engine's noise made it impossible to talk, not that she wanted to. Her thoughts drifted to her pa. He'd always told her to never forget who she was and where she came from. Stay proud. Wasn't she? Guilt hit her. If only she'd been able to go home to take care of Pa. The war had prevented that. Now, rootless, she fought in a war across the ocean. If she ever made it back to Oregon, home wouldn't be the same without her Pa or her brothers. The pilot half turned and handed her a thermos. "If that didn't wake you up, this will. Pass it around." He grinned. "Restorative. Whiskey? This early? No wonder the plane got in trouble." She sniffed. "Tea." The English answered to everything. She poured a stream into the tin cup chained to the lid and sipped. So steeped and full of tannin, it woke her up. All right. After spending half the day at Trent Park and the rest training with Stepney, her handler, she needed it. He'd said she'd be in France for 3 days max, one dirty weekend in Paris. Drop the penicillin, hit the target Margot directs you to, and extract her. She wiped the cup with the edge of her nurse's cape, passed it to the RAF man, a mumbled thanks. The slumped, blindfolded figure's ankles seemed to twitch. She couldn't make out much in the dark plane. A prisoner? That much she gathered, escorted from one prison to another, like she'd begun to feel. The prisoner's ankles continually twitched, and the manacled wrists joined in making a metallic clanking, shaking in fear or... The first rule in training was keep your mouth shut. This prisoner wasn't her business. The pressure in the cabin made her ears pop. Sometime later, a swath of landing strip appeared, bordered by dense forest. After the pilot's seat of the pants takeoff, who knew if he could land the damn thing? Her nerves vibrated with the plane and she rubbed her neck, her skin moistened by perspiration. The RAF man's fingers drummed on the cabin's metal ribs. The steady beat of tuck, tuck, tuck put her more on edge. Below appeared an airfield control tower resembling a child's stack of blocks. Lining the runway, faded khaki, corrugated steel Nissen huts, and men in dark Navy flight suits. A Royal Air Force clandestine site. The plane dropped altitude and so did her stomach. Any minute she'd be sick. But a quick plummet, a heavy thump, and the screeching of tires meant they'd landed. Finally, her throat caught as they bounced over the runway, while the brakes force threw her back against the seat. Any minute, she feared this tin bucket would go crashing into the forest. A quick maneuver by the pilot pivoted the Argus into an open hangar. The plane shuddered to a halt. Bile rose in her throat. She had to get out. She unharnessed herself, grabbed her carryall, and climbed onto the concrete. The prisoner was hustled off and into a waiting transport truck. Another plane had taxied to the front of the hangar. "We expect your cooperation," a man in overalls said. She took a deep breath, kerosene odors and a soldering iron's acrid fumes. But thank God she stood on terra firma. Her stomach righted. He handed her a new satchel. A plane's motors whined, a Lancaster model, the kind used for landings in the French countryside. "Where's Stepney?" "Haven't the foggiest," he said. "But when's my updated brief? Plans changed. You need to get going." Sirens whelped, startling her. Changed how? Men in flight suits started running across the tarmac. An ominous droning filled the sky, getting louder. That familiar flutter of fear danced up her neck. She remembered the sound of the Luftwaffe's planes bombing the Orkney munitions factory. "The Luftwaffe is attacking, Sherlock," he said. "Time to hurry." With that, he whipped a blindfold around Kate's forehead. What in God's name had been the point of that first stop, and in the middle of an air attack? Within 2 minutes, she'd been strapped back in. Her 2 co-passengers were gone. "Where are we going?" Only the whirring of the propellers. The next moment, she felt a sharp prick in her arm and a piercing coldness. That was the last thing she knew. Voilà.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun. Thank you so much, Cara.
Thank
All right,
you.
I've got some questions for you, but I'm going to go on to Brendan first. Brendan,
Hello.
hello. Your main character, Amy Cornwall, grew up in Maine, and she has simple tastes that run to Sam Adams beer, which I cannot
Yes.
get open because I forgot these don't twist,
Plain
and plain cheese pizza.
cheese pizza.
Plain cheese pizza. All
Yeah.
right. I want to hear a little bit about Countdown. Oh,
Certainly.
first, you live in
Yeah.
New Hampshire. Where's your favorite place to get pizza where you live?
Oh, it's called Front Row Pizza, and it just makes the best pizza. And
Front
we
Row
put the good
Pizza,
stuff in
okay.
there.
All right.
Yep.
Front Row Pizza.
Countdown is the
Countdown,
sequel.
tell us all about it.
Yes, Countdown is the sequel to a book that James Patterson and I, or we like to call him around my house, Big Jim, Jimbo, the Jimbaroni. The Cornwalls are gone. In that book, Amy Cornwall was an Army officer in Army intelligence, and her husband and child were kidnapped, and the whole book was about her extricating them. At the end of that book, she was invited to jump ship and join the CIA, which she did. In Countdown, she is an officer in the Special Activities Division, which goes overseas to do very dangerous and very exciting stuff, I guess, one way to say, involving guns and explosives and killing the bad guys.
Mhm.
And Countdown starts off with she and 4 other officers. 2 are CIA and 2 are British MI6. And the British are ambushed as they leave their operation. And Amy and the 2 Americans are heading to the extrication, where they have to be at a certain point at 9 a.m. because at 9:05, their ride home disappears. And that just opens up the book to a whole thing where she and a MI6 officer realize there's a major terrorist attack coming to the United States, and their respective superiors don't believe it's coming. and they sort of have to operate on their own under a lot of pressure. So what I'd like to do is read an opening scene where it's in northern Lebanon. Their two British compatriots have been captured by Al Qaeda, and her two Americans, Jordan and Santiago, are desperately trying to get to the rendezvous point to leave. So here we go.
All right.
As the Wadi comes into view, it's 8:59 a.m., a minute ahead of schedule, but I can already sense the catastrophe that's going to echo loudly between Langley and London the next 2 days. Our two British officers will shortly be captured, tortured, and probably paraded around or made the topic of a propaganda tape by whatever armed group has found them. We've all been sheep dipped, meaning that whatever paperwork we carry identifies us as contract workers for global security solutions. That means in the event of our capture or our death, our respective governments will have plausible deniabilities for us mercenaries in the field. A nice cover story, which would no doubt last about as long as it would take for an Al Qaeda type to come after one of our feet or hands with a chainsaw. We're off the trail in the outskirts of the Wadi, and Santiago mutters a prayer in Spanish and then says, "There she is. Have you ever seen anything so beautiful?" Truth is, the latest classified and stealth helicopter is one ugly bird. It has droopy water blades and retractable landing skids, and its current color matches the rocky slabs nearby. The fuselage, all sharp angles, has a high-tech liquid crystal exterior, meaning that when the helicopter finally gets off the ground, its exterior will match the surrounding sky. Radar can't see it, and bare eyes will detect only flickering shadows like a distant flock of birds. Oh yeah, it's ugly, expensive, and a bitch to fly, and I want to be on it so bad I can taste it. Its engine is humming along nicely, and we move forward, and the rotators start to move. I look behind me, tail end Charlie, watching our six, hoping against hope that our British comrades have broken free and are now running down the trail to join us. No such luck. The engine is at full power now, the sound of alarm hum, the blades spin into blur, and I see the frame of the helicopter rise just a bit. So close. I check my watch. It's 9:02. One after another, I clap Jordan and Santiago on the shoulders. "Hold," I yell. I hunker down, they do the same, all of us three looking, backing up at the epic trail. Waiting. The seconds whizzing by. Jordan leans into me. "Amy, they're not coming." I check my watch. It's 9:03. I yell back, "We wait." Santiago swears, but he and Jordan stick with me. Dust is starting to kick up, biting our eyes. I blink hard and look up at the trailhead. Come on, I whisper, knowing the odds of their showing up are near zero. But you have to believe sometimes, believe they can make it, believe in miracles. Santiago tugs at my shoulder, points to his watch. It's 9:05, 5 minutes late. "We stay," I yell back. Santiago looks at Jordan, Jordan looks to him, and the two of us all look at the chopper, ready to scoop us up and take us on to a Navy vessel in this part of the Mediterranean on a routine training mission. Routine. That's how the deaths of our British comrades are going to be reported if they get killed outright, without the horror of captivity and tortured. Died while on a routine training mission. And me, I've lost half my crew in a follow-up. Almost as one, Jordan Santiago scream my name, and I look at my watch. 9:06. The nice crew over there from the Night Stalkers has given us an extra 6 minutes, and maybe I'll live long enough to thank them. But then the helicopter lifts straight up, its landing struts retreating into its belly. The chopper rises up of the wadi, soars over a rugged set of rocks, and then it disappears, just like that. Now even its engine sound has gone away. All I can hear is the heavy breathing of my crew, Jordan and Santiago, who both stare at me with murder in their eyes. I stand up from my crouching position. Saddle up, fellas. We're going back to get our guys. So,
Dun, dun, dun.
dun, dun, dun.
Love it. Dun,
Thank
dun,
you.
dun. Thank you so much. I have questions for you, Brendan, but first I'm going to go to William. William relaxes in his favorite chair with a small glass of bourbon neat. And I had some, but I drank it. So this is my sadly empty decanter.
What's with the antlers?
So what's with the antlers? Yeah, yeah, like that. All right. Okay. What is your favorite bourbon?
Oh my. I don't think I could name a favorite. I like too many of them. Right now, Well, my go-to, let's see, my go-to is probably Maker's Mark. But right now I'm drinking one called Burrell, which is excellent. Highly recommended.
Okay. How do you spell that?
2 R's, 2 L's.
2 R's, 2 L's. Okay. Well,
Burrell.
check it out. William, tell us all about All That Is Mine I Carry With Me.
So All That Is Mine I Carry With Me is a story about a missing woman, a missing person case. It's about, it begins with a young girl, an 8-year-old girl in Newton, Massachusetts, a suburb of Boston, where I live, who comes home to find her house empty and her mother missing. And her father is a criminal defense lawyer, and suspicion immediately falls upon him, as it often does in a case where a spouse goes missing. And it is thought, because he is an expert on criminal law, that he will also be expert at getting away with crimes. But so the crime goes unsolved. There's no evidence. And the novel really is about the weight of this woman's absence on her children and the weight of not knowing what became of their mother. And although it is a crime story, it really is about this sort of universal experience that we all have of growing up and losing our parents one way or another, and also coming to see our parents as fellow adults, as these children have to look at their father, who is suspected of this crime, and they have to assess whether he is actually capable of it. And that is a weight that takes a toll. And the story follows them over the next 40 years and the effect on their growing up and on their personalities.
Wow.
Wow.
Will you read to us?
Yes, I'll read badly. I have to say that there's no overlap between acting skill and writing skill. So writers are very bad readers, but I will. Here's the cover, by the way.
Beautiful.
So this is how the book opens. After I finished writing my last novel, I fell into a long silence. You might call it writer's block, but most writers don't use that term or even understand it. When a writer goes quiet, nothing is blocking, nothing is being blocked. He's just empty. I don't know why this silence settled over me. Now that it's over, I don't like to think about it. I only know that for months, then a year, then 2 years, I could not write. It did no good to struggle. The more I struggled, the tighter the noose became. I couldn't write, then I couldn't sleep, then I couldn't bear my own presence, and I began to think dark thoughts. I won't dwell on the details. In my profession, there's a saying that a writer's troubles are of interest only to other writers. I mention my silent period here only because it's the reason I wrote this book. For it was during this time, when I would have grabbed at any plausible idea for a story, that I got an email from an old friend named Jeff Larkin. I've known Jeff since we were 12 years old. We met in September 1975 when we entered the 7th grade together at a very august and, to me, terrifying private school for boys, and we became pals almost immediately. Let me say I'm uneasy about starting a book this way, with friends and confessions about my childhood. I'm not nostalgic for that time in my life. I'm not even sure an honest account is possible. I don't trust my own memories. I tell myself so many stories about my past, as we all do. Worse, much worse, I don't think a writer ought to insert himself into his stories this way. It generally distracts more than it deepens. A writer's place is offstage. But what choice do I have? If I'm going to tell this story, there's no way around a little autobiography. So, when I was in 6th grade, my teacher called my parents out of the blue to suggest I was bored at school, which was certainly true. Had they considered sending me to a private school, someplace rigorous and rulesy, where I wouldn't continue to be, and I'll paraphrase here, a daydreamer and a smartass? My folks had never thought of it. They had both gone to public schools, and they presumed that fancy private schools were for Yankees. But Mom and Dad grasped the teacher's essential meaning what I needed was a swift kick in the pants. So the next fall, I found myself at a school that probably hadn't looked much different 20 or even 50 years earlier. There were no girls. There was a school necktie. Spanish was not taught, but ancient Latin was required. The gym was called a palestra, the cafeteria, the refectory. Portraits of mustachioed old masters hung in the hallways. There was a half-length painting of King Charles I gazing down at us with his needle nose and Van Dyke beard, which alone might have cured me of daydreaming and smartassery. Even my parents were dazzled and intimidated by the place. My mother warned me, "They smile at you, these wasps, but I promise you, behind closed doors, they call us kikes." Jeff Larkin felt no such anxiety. When he arrived at school, he was a prince. His older brother, Alex, was a senior and a three-sport star with the heroic aura that surrounds high school athletes. Jeff's dad was well known too. He was a criminal defense lawyer, the kind that showed up in the newspaper or on TV, standing beside a gangster, swaggering on about the incompetence of the police and the innocence of his wrongly accused client. There was a dark glamour to Mr. Larkin's work, at least before the catastrophe, when his association with violent crime stopped being a thing to admire. But that came later. Forbidding as the school was, at least I had a new friend. Jeff and I hit it off right away. We were inseparable. It was one of those childhood friendships that was so natural and uncomplicated, we seemed to discover it more than we created it. I have no adult friendships like the one I had with Jeff. I'm sure I never will. Once we slip on the armor of adulthood, we lose the ability to form that kind of naive, unqualified connection. But 40 years later, when I got Jeff's email in 2015, we had been out of touch for a very long time. He reached me by sending a fan email from my author website, just as any stranger would do. "Hey," his email said in its entirety, "love the book. Mr. K would be proud." Mr. K was a beloved English teacher. "You up for a beer sometime?" "I'm up for 3, I emailed back, or 43. Just name the place. And that's how the book begins.
I
Well done.
think you read that beautifully.
Well done.
Thank you.
Okay, I have questions for you, but first I'm going to go on to Brittany. Brittany, here we are. Okay. Brittany's favorite drink is a Paloma. Tell us a little bit about how we make this and the favorite tequila.
Casamigos Reposado, which can be hard to come by at some bars, but I think since the pandemic, it's starting to resurface again. It's kind of like a vanilla-y tequila. It's delicious. And that with grapefruit juice, pink grapefruit juice, and soda water, top of the line.
And also paired with cheddar popcorn.
Yes, and I actually have mine. I came with all my snacks. I thought
You came with your snacks.
with my
I
snacks.
used
my
to have
drink.
tequila, but I drank it, so I have no tequila. Are you
Okay,
sensing a pattern?
it's
I
all
drank
good.
it. All
So-
right. Brittany, tell us about the Syndicate Spy.
Okay, so it is set sometime in the future. Earth's oil reserves have been depleted. Nations are racing against terrorists to control alternative energy sources. And the syndicate, a conglomerate of allied intelligence agencies, is trying to put an end to a global energy war. Syndicate spy Juliet Arroway, my heroine, and her best friend, Mariam al-Assad, a Saudi princess, are tasked with hunting down the terrorist. When the syndicate begins to suspect that Mariam's family, the Saudi royal family, is somehow involved, tensions build and the carnage multiplies. Juliet's longtime boyfriend, Jean-Marc, is targeted and killed. And in her quest to seek revenge and end the war, Juliet is paired with Graham, a dashing yet arrogant FBI agent with whom she falls madly in love with, to infiltrate Mariam's family to prevent further attacks. But when peace means a stunning betrayal, Juliet must decide if her mission is worth risking her own life as well as those of the lives that she loves.
All right. Well, will you read to us?
Yes. Okay. So it's kind of deep in the book, but I thought this was like kind of like a fun read. What you need to know before I read it is there's something called the Mutaween that I have created, and they're bad guys. Aziz is the bad guy. That's what you need to know. And you're in the middle of Chechnya sometime in the future.
Okay. Got it.
Juliet's neck ached and her jaw throbbed as she strained her eyes to see Miriam on top of a horse with her M4 rifle aimed. Behind her, 4 legions of Aziz's Mutaween pounded toward Miriam on horseback, their hooves kicking up the molten earth as they descended from the mountain. It was near nightfall, but the explosion in the watchtower had turned the sky an electric blue, casting an eerie glow on the vapid tan and brown tapestry of the ancient necropolis. Juliet glanced overhead, pleading with something divine that Graham had somehow survived the explosion. Nothing remained but the charred skeleton of the watchtower and a river of smoke from which she had emerged. Something within her chest snapped. Still restrained by Jean-Marc, Juliet struggled to meet Miriam's face. Graham? Her question came out like a croak. A solemn look crossed Miriam's face as she shook her head. Juliet's toes curled within her sopping wet shoes, and she bit the inside of her cheek hard to keep from crying out. She had tried to keep herself from feeling too much for him, tried to keep their love from her mind, but as she watched the silos of smoke that stretched up into the sky, she knew she had failed. She felt the burn of tears pooling in her eyes. Jean-Marc let out a boisterous laugh. Still hoping your FBI agent will come and save you? Hatred coiled within her stomach, setting her insides on fire. There was something deeply irrational about that laugh. She drew a breath and tried to free a hand. Where do you think you're going? Jean-Marc asked as he continued to crush her with all his weight. She sniffed hard, trying to keep her wits about her as she struggled to free herself. She wanted to slash at his face and run toward the partially collapsed watchtower, still billowing with smoke, to find Graham. Beneath the rubble, perhaps there was a way to still get to him. Her stomach was in knots as she peered up at Jean-Marc. You're going to regret this. Oh, I doubt that very much. She searched his face for some sign that the Jean-Marc she had known was still there, but nothing was left in his eyes but contempt. He had traded his soul for money. Let her go, Miriam said, her black hair billowing around her face as she dismounted her horse. Now. Her face was bruised and bloody, but her back was straight as she dismounted her horse and headed toward Juliet. Miriam's brilliant hazel eyes flickered from Juliet toward Jean-Marc and back again. She had seen that savage look more than a dozen times before. Miriam was calculating how best to kill Jean-Marc without killing Juliet in the process. 2 Mutaween threaded their way toward her, insisting that she drop her gun in Arabic. She complied, but Juliet could see that she had a plan moving behind her eyes. Is this really the best the syndicate has got? Jean-Marc asked in a mocking tone. I would not underestimate either one of us. Miriam's voice was calm, but Juliet could see the fury building behind her eyes as 2 Mutaween struggled to pin her hands behind her back. Because once we succeed, she went on in steely tones, there will be no mercy for men like you. Aziz edged closer, his black cape billowing in the wind as his guards followed closely behind. Nor you, your allegiance should and will lie with me. Miriam let out a boisterous laugh. I don't know what you think you're doing. Her voice trailed off as she surveyed the area around them. But you will regret the role you have played in this game. I swear it. With one nod from Aziz, the circle of guards grew tighter, along with Jean-Marc's painful grip on Juliet. Despite her petite frame, Miriam stood tall amid the smoke that billowed behind her. Do your worst. I will not bend.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun,
All
dun,
right.
dun.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well
I've
done.
got questions for you too, but I'm going to circle back first to Cara.
Yeah.
Cara, first question. Let's talk about Paris. You went to Paris for the first time in 1971. What drew you to Paris? And can you talk about the importance of the stories that you'd heard from your family members and the family members of your friends that drew you to it and to the stories that you write today?
Sure, and I just want to say all these readings were amazing, especially there's so much sensory detail in each of them, you know, using all the five senses. So kudos everyone. Yeah, what drew me to Paris? Well, I'd gone to a French Catholic school when I was young. I had nuns who spoke French, and we learned French, but we never knew we learned archaic French, actually. When I went to Europe, you know, on the big tour, you know, we were hitchhiking around and traveling, and I'd always wanted to go to Paris because I'd written a fan letter to the writer Romain Gary, who is really famous in Europe and in France. He was married to Jean Seberg, the actress, and he's a Prix Goncourt winning author. And he had written me a letter back and was so generous. And somehow, for reasons unknown, he gave me his address. It was on the back of an envelope, and I took that as an invitation. So I just, you know, appeared, yeah, with a, you know, probably a, you know, a flannel shirt and jeans and a backpack, and I went to this exquisite building, and it was just amazing. And I knocked on the door, and he opened it, and he was, oh, quite a charismatic man. And he looked at me and he said, "Do I know you?" And I said, "Oh, of course, you know, like, you remember the letter I wrote you." Like, this man doesn't get a lot of letters, right? I mean, and I think he did not know what to do with me. So he took me down the stairs of his amazing, you know, this apartment with the stained glass and gold and everything. We walked on the Rue du Bac, which in the left bank, to the first cafe. We walked in, a real Parisian cafe. You know, it's all locals, zinc counter, smoking, you know, everything. And as we walk in, and there was an espresso and a cigar waiting on the zinc counter for Monsieur Gary. And the cafe man said, "Well, what about her?" And Monsieur Gary said, "Well, she'll have the same." That's when I had my first espresso, my first cigar, with the Prix Goncourt winning author. And it was very heady stuff, Tosca. I mean, you know, I maybe I thought that is the life of the writer. But years later, I went back to France, and I had lived in Switzerland working. But when I was in France, my friend took me to the Marais, which in the early 90s, or no, it was the mid 80s, was not gentrified, not like now, not like many of you know. And she took me down the street and said, "My mother lived here during the war. She was a hidden Jewish girl during the occupation. 1942, she came home from school. Her parents were gone. She wore a yellow star and they never returned." Anyway, so I never forgot that story. I had never met anyone. You know, I grew up in California. Years later, I went back with my son when he was little, and I remember I put him to bed. And I thought, and I went to try and find this apartment. I don't know if I did. And I thought, what, you know, now I was a mother. Now I was thinking, what would I have done, you know, to put food on his plate? What if we had to hide? How would we survive? What if I had done things I wasn't proud of, you know, and it came back to bite me 50 years later? Anyway, that became Murder in the Marais. And then I ended up writing a series with my computer security detective. And I'll make this quick here, but my editor, all the time for 20 years, I was writing these detective stories. But you know, you can't get away from history in Paris, and who wants to, right? But when I would go back and I would do research, I would talk to people, I would go to an archive, I would see the bullet marks in a window, in the wall, you know, from World War II. I knew the past was right there. And I took notes, and I said to my editor, "I have all this information, and a lot of it did not fit in an Amy Leduc book." You know, of course. She said, "Keep that stuff, you never know." And so maybe 10 years ago, I saw a note, footnote in a history book, I was reading, and it said, "Adolf Hitler went to Paris for 3 hours. He left and he never returned." And I went, why? And then, you know, that mystery writer, thriller writer, what if something happened? Why couldn't something happen? And voila, that inspired 3 Hours to Paris, Kate Reese. And then now it is the follow-up, because Kate Reese you know, where has she gone in her life from 1940, now it's 1942, and she has a new mission. I hope that answered your Paris question.
Absolutely. And Night Flight to Paris is the second book, right?
Correct,
I
yeah.
had a question on Facebook about it. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, I can't read those questions.
No, they're coming to me. They're coming to me.
Okay. Yeah, we call it a follow-up, you know, 1940 is 3 Hours in Paris, now it's 1942. They stand alone.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you so much. I'm going to go on to Brendan. Brendan,
Hello.
got a question for you.
Sure.
And I know you get asked this 500 times a day.
Go for
How
it.
did you end up writing with James Patterson,
Oh.
asking for a friend, asking for about 10 friends, 10 writers?
Um,
Show us
sure.
the sign. Where's the,
Oh, there he is,
yeah, there he is.
my best
He's
bud.
grinning.
Several years ago, he started a new book line called Book Shots, novellas of 40,000 words. And I was recommended to him by an editor, and he had read, and Jim had read a couple of my short stories. He was looking for writers who could turn around quick and write quick and work well with him. Jim's a great guy to work with if you do exactly what he wants. So
I
did-
heard that.
yeah, we did 3 book shots, and I had never contacted with him. I worked with an editor at Little Brown. It was sort of like Jim was Zeus at top of the mountain. My editor was in a villa halfway down the mountain, and I was toiling in the pig farm and vineyards at the bottom. And after the 3rd book shot was done, I did an outline for a 4th. My editor said, Jim wants to talk to you about it. And my first words was, what's wrong? And she said, no, Jim just wants to talk to you. So he called me up, and let me tell you, there's something about seeing the caller ID in your phone saying James Patterson that gets your attention. And he talked a bit, and he said he enjoyed the work I'd done on the 3 book shots. And on the 4th book shot, he said, you know, Brendan, this outline you did is pretty good. I think we could make it into a full-length novel. Would you like to work on a full-length novel with me? And he said,
And
I'll
he
give
said,
you a couple.
no.
He said, I'll give you a couple weeks to think about it. So he said, I'll give you a couple weeks to think about it. And I said, no, I'm good. Let's do it. So here we are. That's how it happened. It was, you know, my writing career 20 years earlier had been ups and downs and sort of muddling along. And it was like the hand of God descended upon me one day and said, okay, you deserve it. So it's been a wonderful, wonderful working relationship. And I really enjoy working with him.
And I need to also ask you, how did you end up on Jeopardy? Tell us that story.
I've been a fan of Jeopardy for years, and several years ago, I saw that they were doing the online test where you sign up and you do the online test, and they give you 50 questions on the computer, and you can answer them. And they don't tell you what the high score is, but there's a certain score in which you'll be invited. So I took that test in February. In April, I got an email from Sony saying, congratulations, you passed the test. Would you be interested in coming down to Boston to do in-person audition? Which I did. And the audition was, you know, they gave you 50 more questions. You did a live play. The producers talked to you. They took your picture. And at the end, they said, you know, 250,000 people take the test. Several thousand get invited to this process. And out of this, we asked 500 to play for the next year. And they say, basically, don't call us, we'll call you. And they said, we start making the calls on June 1st, but we spread the calls out through the year. So don't get excited. So, of course, on June 1st, I was out grocery shopping and had my dog. And then I came into the house and my wife said, where the hell have you been? And Jeopardy get called. And so I called them back and I went out to tape in August, actually July, and only met Alex quickly because they keep the contestants and Alex Trebek very far apart. I won the first show, which was very exciting, and they flew me back for the second show. And the best part was they call you champ. How you doing, champ? Okay, time for makeup, champ. Come this way, champ. And on the second game, I had my proverbial ass handed to me on a silver platter, but it was still a lot of fun. It was an exhilarating experience. I even wrote a nonfiction book about it.
Wow.
It really was.
Can you say, because it is public knowledge, it's right there on the screen. Can you say how much money you won on the first one?
In total, I won $24,000.
Not bad for a trip to Boston.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember calling my parents well, you get $1,000 for just showing up. So I actually had 123. And so I called up my parents, who were children of the Depression. I told my mom and dad, well, keep it a secret, but I won. And how much did you win? $23,000. And my mother said, $2,300? That's excellent. And I said, no, Mom, add another zero. It was $23,000.
Oh, wow.
Hmm.
That's great. I love that story. All right. I've got more questions, but I'm going to go on to William. William. Now, I know that you tried for a long time, as did all of us, to get that first book published. And you were in the obstetrician's office when you got the news that you had sold your first book. Tell us that story, would you?
That's true. Well, I had, so I was an assistant DA before I started writing, and I was writing nights and weekends, and I developed a pattern of leaving the DA's office to write a book, or an attempt at a book, or a partial book. I had several failed manuscripts. And when I would pull out my retirement money, and when the money ran out or when the words ran out, I would go back and become an assistant DA again. So in the interim of 10 years or so of trying to do this, I had gotten married, which didn't really change all that much. But then my wife got pregnant, and I figured that was the end, and I was ready to walk away and go get a real job. Growing up, there were no writers or artists of any kind in my life. So it had never occurred to me that this could be a rational career choice. It still isn't an entirely rational career choice, to be clear. So I was getting ready to walk away, and I had submitted a last book, and we were literally in the OB's office to hear the baby's heartbeat when my agent called. And we had an offer for the first book, and it was actually a 2-book offer, which means that you are a writer, at least in the meantime. So I was able to stay at it, and that's kind of set the pattern for everything since. I still don't really look at this as a real job. And you kind of go from book to book and project to project, and there's no guarantee that there'll ever be a next book. So that's kind of how I still look at it.
Mm-hmm. And you were able, though, to go from there to down the line. You're watching Defending Jacob be turned into a series. So what was that like?
It is surreal. And I hope for all of my fellow writers that you get this chance one time, because you go to a set and you hear the lines that you literally just made up while you were sitting in your office or in Starbucks or in wherever it was that you were writing, and your story becomes real in a way that it never quite becomes real when you're just writing. Books are consumed in private, and they come to a reader as a kind of sheet music, and the reader brings her skill to it in reading those words and performing the story for herself in her head. But it's always imaginary. It's imaginary both on the writer's side and on the reader's side. And it never quite becomes concrete and specific. And so to go to a movie set where there are a couple of hundred people building the places that you've imagined, and actors embodying the characters you've imagined, speaking the lines that you've invented, is very, very strange, but satisfying.
I imagine it must be. All right. Well, thank you. I'm going to go on to Brittany and ask Brittany a question now. Brittany, you joined the CIA right after 9/11, right after college. So, yeah. Right?
2005. Yeah.
So right from Florida to counterterrorism in the Middle East. So that's kind of a change. What was that like? How much training time in between did you get? And it sounds very drastic. So what was that like for you?
Yeah, so I was recruited. Actually, these stories about Paris is really breaking me back. I was recruited out of the American Embassy in Paris in 2004. I was an intern there my junior year of college, and I worked in the consulate section, and I was running name traces on people. Name traces just means like, doing research on whoever is trying to come into the country and they're applying for a visa or a passport or whatever. And I was doing name traces on an individual, and I had some knowledge of Arabic naming conventions, and because of my degree in international affairs, and I identified somebody who was trying to get into the country that wasn't supposed to. And so actually my boss at the American Embassy was like, have you ever thought about applying at the CIA? And I was like, never. I thought I was just going to be like a foreign service officer. That's what I was going for, at least. And I applied, and I like got the first interview, and then it just kind of like spiraled from there. And no, it was I come from a very small town in Georgia. I had never been outside the United States until I did that internship at the American Embassy in Paris. So it was quite a shock, but I think CIA at that time, we were really hitting the ground running after 9/11, and then we got involved in the Iraq War. And so whenever I got in, it was like, okay, you got to start working like right away. And so the training was kind of intermittent, like throughout my time there. So like before I got ready to go to Iraq, I did some training. So I went to the farm, and they give you, the shooting course. You learn how to, depending upon where you were going in Iraq at that time, you either got trained on a Glock and an M4 or just a Glock. And so I was trained on both weapons because I was going out to our bases, not only to Baghdad Station. And that was really cool. It was really cool to like learn how to shoot a gun. Again, I'd never have been around weapons ever in my life. I mean, when I started out, I was closing my eyes on the backfire. Like that's how horrible I was. And they like took me aside, these amazing special forces guys, and they're like, you need extra attention. And they trained me, and like, I kid you not, like I was the best shot in the class at the end of this training because I listened to them. Like I really like paid attention, and I took the training really seriously. And it was just fabulous, like to get that kind of like expertise and training. And I learned how to drive a car defensively, like if someone's shooting at you, and like what to do if you're, caught at I was taught all sorts of stuff. So it was crazy. You feel like you're in a movie. You're like, I can't believe they want me to do this stuff. But I took the job really seriously. And so every meeting I ever went to with a detainee or a source, I walked into the room as the expert they expected me to be. And I knew everything there was to know about that source or that detainee. And so I was involved in counterterrorism for, 9 years. And I spent time in Iraq and Afghanistan and Pakistan. And, but at the same time, that work really wears on you. And so I left. I have 3 sons. And when I had my second son, I decided that it was time to leave. But really honored and grateful to have had that job.
Mhm. Thank you for doing that job. And The Syndicate Spy is your debut novel,
Mhm.
correct? So
Yep.
how has that process been for you? Have there been any surprises or things that you didn't see coming, or how has imagining what that's like been versus reality?
Yeah, so it was really important to me I worked for the human rights organization in the Middle East after I left CIA, and we focused on women's rights in Afghanistan. And I wrote this book like 4 years ago. So I didn't know what was going to happen with Afghanistan, the fact that the Taliban would take over again, that women's rights would be this huge issue once again. And so when I created Mariam Al-Assad, one of my protagonists, she like embodies like the fight for women's rights in the Middle East. And it came to a huge surprise to me that everything that was started to happen in Iran and other places in the Middle East, that there was this movement like taking root. And I thought, oh my gosh, this timing is perfect, because I really feel like through literature, you can reach such a broader audience about, these type of ideas of, whether that be women's rights or equal human rights or whatever. And I thought this is the perfect time for this book. So that was really surprising to me that like I was planning this for so long, writing this really strong Arab female character, and the fact that like everything happening in the world right now, I just think it's time for a story like this to come out about a really strong female Arab.
Mhm. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, do we have questions that I've missed that we need to very quickly try to fit in? I'm looking through I tried to touch on some of them. Maybe. Okay. I think that we are going to try to wrap it up because we're hitting the 1 hour mark. So I just want to say thank you, Cara. Thank you, Brendan. Thank you, William. Thank you, Brittany, for this wonderful event. And thank you, viewers, for joining us. It's been a real pleasure getting to hear your stories in your own words and in your voice. And as a reminder, each of these books, and these are new books, are available or are going to be available anywhere books are sold. So we hope that you'll go pick up a copy now that you've met the author personally. And I also hope that you'll join us next month on April 17th. We'll be hosting guests Alma Katsu, Jocelyn Jackson, Don Bentley, and Brendan Slocum. So yeah, show us those books one more time if you have them handy. Also, viewers, if you choose to post about our event tonight or any upcoming ones, please use the hashtags Rogue Reads and Rogue Women Writers as we post about our wonderful experiences getting to meet these authors. So thank you so much for joining us. This was so fun. And you can't see my screen, but I had 5 more questions for each of you that I could have asked. I mean, Brendan, I wanted to ask about your family donut shop. And I mean, I have questions. I have stuff I wanted to know about. But we're just out of time, and this happens every single time because there's too much interesting stuff. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
It's
you.
been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much. Great to
Thanks.
meet you guys.
Stay safe.
Great to meet you all. Thank you.
you.
All as well.
Bye. Bye.